Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Cheek podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Simpson Thatcher, home of the private equity training contract. So, my name is Lydia Fonts. I'm a writer at Legal Cheek, and I'm here today with my fellow Legal Cheek writer and future pupil barrister, Saul. Hi, Saul.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
So
Um,
tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey as a future pupil barrister, when you got your pupillage, all of that.
yes, of course. Like a lot of people, I did a non-law degree. I did a 4-year undergraduate course in classics. I then kind of realised I wanted to be a barrister. Went straight on to the law conversion course at City. I didn't apply for pupillage in that year, which I think we'll probably talk about a bit later. And I then went on to do the bar course also at City, applied for pupillage in that year and got it. And so next year I'm going to be starting pupillage at 39 Essex Chambers.
Yeah, that's great. So I think it's well known that pupillage is something that's really difficult to secure. So we're going to be talking a little bit about, I guess, a bit of insider advice from Saul, who's been through it all, and come out the other side with a successful result. I thought maybe we'd start a little bit about talking about building your CV before you even open those application forms and begin your applications. What are the sort of things that aspiring barristers should be thinking about when it comes to sort of building their work experience, building their CV?
Yeah, so I think there are probably three things that aspiring barristers should be thinking about other than getting the grades. So those are mini pupillages, pro bono experience, and mooting. And so taking those in order, mini pupillages are important, firstly because they give you an idea of how life at the self-employed bar works, which is going to be important for most barristers. But they can also give you insight into the specific area that you're looking to go into, whether that be commercial or family or crime or public. And so it's very important to get those early on. You'll be able to show an interest that way in life at the bar and the sets that you end up applying to. The second thing is pro bono work. That's important. So that, for those who don't know, that's kind of voluntary, unpaid work, like working in a legal clinic, or as I did, volunteering for a trade union. That's important not only because it's a good, generous thing to do, but also because it will build skills that you'll be using as a barrister. So for me, working in a legal clinic, I was dealing with people who had legal problems and often were very stressed, and I had to manage an active caseload. And a lot of those skills are transferable to working at the bar. And then working as a union advocate, I built up my advocacy. I was, again, managing my own caseload and trying to persuade employers of what the union member wanted. And then the final thing is mooting. That is important both because it builds up your knowledge of the law, but also because it builds up your advocacy experience in a court environment. A court environment is unlike other settings you may have spoken publicly in. It's quite stilted, and it's good to get as much experience of that as you can early on, particularly if you want to work in a court-heavy area like crime. So those are the three things that I'd advise future barristers to focus on building their CV around.
Yeah, brilliant. And obviously some of these things are sort of easier said than done. I'm sure people listening might be like, oh yeah, I know I should do a mini pupillage, but how do I actually go from thinking, oh, that's something I should do to making it happen? I think we talked a little bit before, Saul, about how it can sometimes be difficult to know when sets are offering these, and how did you go about sort of actually practically putting that all in place?
Yeah, so it's by no means an easy task, either to find out what minis are on offer or to get them. The way that I found was just to find sets in areas that I was interested in places that I lived, and I would just kind of go down the page and see what minis they were offering, when the deadlines were, what the forms were, and I just put it into a big spreadsheet. So I had kind of the next 6 months maybe of mini pupillage deadlines, and I spent a lot of time just whenever I had a moment, dashing off an application because volume is very important with minis. I'm sure lots of people will realize that they're very hard to get, even though they're basically just work experience. But trust me, put in the time, and once you've got one, you'll find others easier to get. So make your own spreadsheet, do it however you do it. Legal Cheek also does have a key deadlines calendar, which will show you some of the top sets when they're offering their mini pupillages. So have a look at that too.
Yeah, I think the key deadlines calendar is a great resource. We do have links to some mini pupillages that are offered by the firms that we work with. So yeah, I think, and so when you say quality, sorry, quality as well, but quantity is an important thing when you're applying to mini pupillages. How selective were you when you're going through that process, when you're just trying to get that initial work experience? Were you Did you approach it as something where you could find, as a sort of learning experience of how to find the areas of law that you were interested in, or did you already have a very clear idea of what you wanted and you were very selective about the minis that you applied for?
Yeah, so at the very beginning, I knew that I wanted to go to the bar, but I didn't really have an idea of what was the difference between the areas or anything like that. So I think I kind of just applied to, sets fairly indiscriminately. And I was quite happy with that because it gave me a fairly broad view of the bar quite early on. So I did a family mini, a couple of crime minis, a commercial mini, a chancery mini. And so I was able to get a broad sense of what the bar might be like, which I think set me up well to really hone what I was looking for when I eventually applied for pupillage.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. And then I think moving on, once you've sort of got those extracurriculars and CV a bit under your belt, it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about strategy. And I think it's difficult. We've released a podcast episode a few weeks ago around applying for training contracts in the solicitor route, and we talked a lot about strategy in that. Um, with all things applying for jobs or applying for university, applying for anything, it's easy to sort of see it like a bit of a game, like there are ways to go about it to give yourself the best chance. Do you think that applies to applying for pupillage?
I think I'm inclined to say no.
Mhm.
I've heard so many people have different ways of approaching it. Some people applying for loads of sets, some people applying for very few. I myself was somewhere in the middle. I mean, it worked for me, but I think the key thing is to remember that you want your whatever applications you send off, you want them to be as good as you can possibly get them. And then, even with that in mind, you want to remember that there is a huge amount of luck involved, particularly at some of these top sets. There are hundreds of people applying for maybe two or three pupillages. So, like, don't be too hard on yourself. I think there is no way to crack it. There is just a lot of hard work and luck and getting more and more familiar with the process kind of over time.
Yeah, and that being said, so you mentioned earlier that you did a GDL, a law conversion, and you chose not to apply that year and to sort of focus on that introduction to law, and then you applied during your bar course. What was sort of your motivation behind that decision, and is that something you'd recommend?
I So speaking first about my motivation, then I'll talk about what I would recommend. Some of my friends on the GDL applied during that year. I didn't, I think for two reasons. Firstly, I was quite stressed out by the GDL. And secondly, I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. At that time, I think I was focused on much more of a kind of common law practice, particularly maybe crime and family law. And now I should say I'm going to be at a multidisciplinary set. with my personal interest being public law, although I'm keen to keep my options open. And so moving on to, well, what would I recommend? I'm glad that I didn't apply in that year because I think I would have geared my applications towards things that, really thinking about it, maybe weren't for me. I think if you know what you want to do and you're set on it, I would recommend giving it a go. As long as it doesn't compromise your ability to do your conversion course or your law degree, there's no harm in doing a few applications, as long as I said earlier, you do it properly. Because there's no point wasting your or Chambers' times by dashing off a few kind of half-effort applications. But I think it can give you a really good idea of what the process is like, what sort of questions Chambers ask, how to answer them, potentially familiarity with interviews if you're lucky enough to get any. And so I kind of felt the lack in some ways of not having been through it before. And I think potentially most people who apply for pupillage have been through it at least once. So on balance, if you know what you want to do, go for it.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. So you mentioned obviously balancing. I mean, it is a time commitment, and anything that's difficult to do, competitive application process is going to be a time commitment. How did you go about? I mean, you didn't apply during your GDL, but you obviously did apply during your bar course. So how was that? And I think probably the answer is just it was quite tough and you just did it. But what advice would you give for people who are sort of doing a law degree, a conversion, bar course, and then thinking, oh my goodness, in the autumn and winter, I'm going to have to think about these applications.
Yes, I think what I would say is plan early. I think so for those who are unfamiliar with the way that most pupilages work, there's something called the gateway. And last year, um, the Chambers released their list of questions late in November, but applicants were only allowed to start drafting their answers in January for about a 3 week period in January. So what I would say is that if you know that you're going to apply for pupillage, use the time that you have, that kind of month and a half from November to January, to really look into the firms that you want to apply for and start drafting your answers. Because trust me, you will save a lot of time and a lot of stress in January. This is something that I wish I'd done a bit better, that I'd made use of that time over Christmas a bit more to polish my applications a bit more so that I wasn't stressed towards the end of that gateway deadline when I also had a not insignificant amount of bar course work to do as well. So I think prepare early and think about it very seriously over Christmas and get most of your answers drafted so that by January, you're spending January trimming, editing rather than writing.
Yeah, and coming to those applications themselves, can you talk a little bit about how many chambers you decided to apply for? Whether you think that was a good number, whether you do fewer, whether you do more, how whether they were all very similar. And then also, I guess we can talk a little bit about how you make those applications stand out. As you say, it's so competitive. What are the sort of things you should be including that you can let a set know? I really know your work. I really think I'd fit in here.
Yes, so for a bit of context, the gateway allows you to do a total of 20, I think, applications. And some people do like four, some people do 20, some people do 20 and then a load of non-gateway applications. And I think I decided to go somewhere in the middle. So I ended up applying for 11 top elite London sets with an expertise in public law, because I kind of thought it's my first time, I'll just go for it and see what happens. And I may very well be here again next year. And I think that was probably a good, it worked quite well for me, although it was very stressful. I think possibly I could have applied for a few fewer places because it ended up being a lot of unnecessary stress, particularly because I was slightly doing them uh, right up to the deadline, pretty much in late January. I could have saved myself a bit of stress by doing fewer applications.
Yeah, that is true. But do you think there's an element of it that is a numbers game because it's so competitive that as long as you're sending off quality applications, that you might apply for 10 or 11 and get one interview back. And if you hadn't applied for that one, then you'd be thinking, oh, I'm nowhere.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the other side of it is that, as I say, it's such a luck-based thing that perhaps perhaps as a rule it's best to do more. But again, if you can handle it, I think if you know yourself and you have done the work over Christmas, there's no harm in doing kind of teens, higher teens. Because as you say, there is an element of it being a numbers game. There is a huge amount of luck. And yeah, I was very fortunate to end up where I did. So yeah, maybe had I applied for fewer places, um, I think things might have been different. I don't know.
Yeah. And obviously we're talking about quantity, but quality is also, I would say, the main thing. So what goes into those applications? And did you notice a difference between the applications you submitted that were progressed and those that weren't, and particular things that stand out? I mean, there's obviously a huge element of luck in it, but what advice would you give? Like, what should go into those answers?
Yeah, so I think there are some questions that you can be sure that you'll be asked, like why do you want to be a barrister? Why do you want to join our set? And my advice for those, I think for being a barrister, you should have a fairly good idea. And you will, I think, over the course of the application process, have a serious think about, well, why do you want to be a barrister? For joining the set, I think that it's a matter of showing a genuine interest in that set. That's not just maybe the big cases that they do with a load of KCs, but also the work that their junior tenants or their baby barristers are doing, because that's the sort of work that you would be doing as a junior tenant at that set. And also, I think showing that you are a good fit for that sort of work from your experiences. And I think basically with certainly with the set that I've ended up at, I was basically just able to do that in a more compelling way than with my other applications. I think there's again, it's one of those things where there's not really an answer. It's something that I think does come from doing a lot of work and looking into sets like quite a lot and thinking about yourself and what you will bring to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so moving on to interviews as well, if you're lucky enough to get one, they can be very intimidating. I'm sure. What was your experience of the interview process and what should people be prepared for?
Yeah, yeah. So I told myself going in that it would be an amazing result if I got even one interview, which I did, and I was very happy with. So in terms of that progression, I had obviously a first round interview and then a final round interview. And so starting with the first round interview, um, it was quite, I was quite stressed about it, obviously, but I think the main thing I did was to try and relax a bit. And I think that really helped me actually in the interview, um, just in terms of how you approached it. And I ended up having quite a lot of fun in that interview. But in terms of other things that I did to prepare, I made a kind of spider diagram of the good barrister. And then I drew out a load of lines with qualities that a good barrister might need, like persuading somebody of something or dealing with a difficult client, or being handed a brief at short notice and having to work to an immovable deadline, like a court deadline. And once I had kind of filled the page, I tried to come up with two, maybe three examples from my own life of times where I had done that or something like very similar. So stuff from legal clinics, but also stuff from, working as a waiter, or internships, or stuff from my personal life. And that I think really helped me because you will get asked competency questions, and there are only so many that you can be asked. And so being able to kind of fire them off like that while still being authentic and based on your own life, I think gives you a real advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a good thing to have at your fingertips, whatever job you're applying to, I guess, because that's such a common thing to be asked. But it's also equally, if you haven't prepared or thought about it in advance, a very hard question. If you think, oh, what's the time I've persuaded somebody of something, and your mind just goes blank. So I think having those sort of
Exactly.
right there um is very very important, and it's a great sign as well when you feel like you really even come out of an interview and you've really enjoyed it. um you never know what the outcome will be, but I think that's a really nice thing. You know that you've been prepared, and also I guess a sign that place might be somewhere that you'd enjoy being.
Absolutely. I mean, it was really encouraging. When I came out of that interview, I thought, well, that was fun. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed. It felt like a kind of nice chat in a way. While obviously, clearly, there was a lot of testing going on. I came out of it feeling quite kind of chuffed, really, even if things hadn't gone any better. Um, and yeah, in terms of the structure of that interview, I was asked a question about my interests, or my experience and how they aligned with the set. I was asked to work through a legal problem that I'd been given shortly before. That was really good fun. And then I was asked a competency question, which happily I had thought about before. And yeah, that was a bit of a contrast from my second round interview, which should I talk a bit about that?
Yeah, as much as you can share. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. My second round interview, in a word, was terrifying. Um, I like it was a real grilling. My feet were really held to the fire, which I was really glad about. It was nice, although obviously really scary, to have so much pushback. And in terms of the structure of that one, um, it was also structured around a legal problem. I'd been given a case to read a few days before that was relevant to the problem that I was being asked. Um, and what I appreciated was that there was so much pushback. It was almost everything I said. The panel said, well, why do you think that? Well, isn't it this? Um, and I think the key piece of advice that I would give to um, people who are going to be in that position is, firstly, don't take it personally. Like, they're there to establish whether you would be a good barrister. It's not about you. Well, it is about you, but it's not about like you personally. And then the second thing I think is, think of it as a chance to show that you really have thought about it, rather than being afraid that, oh, we're gonna venture into territory that I don't really know about. Just sit there, think about the question you've been asked, and then give the best answer that you can. And I think there's a balance to be struck as well between being too movable and meek. I think you don't really want to immediately say, well, of course you're right. But equally, if it becomes clear that like you are wrong, I think don't die on that hill. Give a good argument, but if you're wrong, just accept it and move on. And of course, that's what you're going to have to do in court. So
Yeah.
I think it's a really good preparation from that point of view.
Yeah, and a good test in a way to see whether that's something that you'd enjoy. Because I think there's something that can be so rewarding about a tough interview or a tough someone who's going to push back at you. And I feel like if you can feel yourself responding and loving that, then you think, oh yeah, can't wait to get started. But equally, it sounds tough. I'm not sure I would love to do that. And I think a lot of resilience as well. And if
Yeah, yeah. And certainly I came out of that interview very, very different from the first one. I thought, oh, okay, that was I'll try again next year, I guess. Um, but yeah, obviously was ended up being very pleasantly surprised. Um, and so I think that's the other thing is don't count yourself out. You will go through this process and you will have to endure a lot of knocks and setbacks and hard times. So like take care of yourself, like don't be too worried or think that it reflects too badly on you. Like, it's a very competitive process, and there's a lot of luck involved. But try and think of it all as a learning experience so that if necessary, you can come back fighting next year. And also, again, it's probably good experience for being a barrister. I know certainly that practically every other question that I was asked on the forms were, can you show resilience? Um, and without wishing, you don't want to say, yes, I can because I'm going through this process. Um, but resilience is I think a really key thing for prospective barristers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. I think that's a whole load of really useful, practical, and interesting advice. So thank you very much, Saul, for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Um, the Legal Cheats podcast is sponsored by Simpson Thatcher, the home of the private equity training contract. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.